Hey guys, I'm going to read chapter 17, Notes on the Mysteries of Mithras. This is from Julius Evola's book, Recognitions, by Arktos. They put together a lot of great work from Evola. They compile random essays and things into usable parts. Subtitle is Studies on Men and Problems from the Perspective of the Right. I'm going to do my best not to trip up. I will stutter a few times, mess some things up, because Evola is not necessarily an easy guy. So, but it's something that's very much worth our time to know. And Mithraism is fascinating to me from a historical point of view, and from the perspective of knowing that it was a mystery religion. You had to be initiated into it. Very little is known about it because they didn't keep written records. The vast majority of what we know about it is from archaeological finds in the Mithraea. They found them all throughout the Roman Empire. Specifically within the borders of the Roman Empire. I don't believe a Mithraea has been found outside of the Roman Empire. There are some obvious Persian connections for Mithras, but it is a uniquely Roman religion that was around the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th century or so. And then after the total domination and rise of Christianity, it sort of fell out of sway as people just kind of stopped following it, I guess. It was a hierarchical religion. It was a male-only religion. Cult, if you will, and so therefore it wasn't necessarily available to the masses in the same way that Christianity was. And Evola is going to talk about that in this chapter, and why not Mithraism over Christianity. So here we go, chapter 17. Arianon wrote, "If Christianity had been arrested by some mortal illness, the world would have been Mithrasized. That is, it would have adopted the religion of Mithras. In general, it is recognized that Mithraism was Christianity's most redoubtable antagonist. After penetrating Rome around the midpoint of the 1st century before Christ, it enjoyed its apogee towards the 3rd century, diffusing itself as far as the more distant provinces of the empire, attracting above all the legionaries and colonizing veterans, who found it congenial for its combative and virile orientation. Emperors such as Hadrian, Commodus, and Aurelius made themselves initiates into its mysteries. Mithraism was officially recognized towards the end of the 2nd century as the religion of the empire, and Mithras was conceived as its protector and champion. His cult was fused, moreover, with that of the sun, Helios, god of divine potency, sovereign and invincible. The date of one of his most important festivals, on which his rebirth was celebrated, was fixed at 25 December, the winter solstice. In their supplanting work, the Christians appropriated this date for their Christmas. The story has it that Constantine himself facilitated between Christianity and Mithraism, and Emperor Julian was certainly an initiate into its mysteries. The same Julian, who can be read in a subsequent essay of the present volume, looked to Mithraism in particular, with the Neoplatonic metaphysics, and to the mystery cults, in his ardent and noble attempt to restore the Roman cults against the flood of Christian beliefs. Regarding the thesis that the ancient world might have been Mithrasized rather than Christianized, we should nevertheless make a few reservations. If it were to advantageously compete with Christianity, Mithraism would have had to descend to Christianity's level. Had it maintained its integrity, it could only with difficulty have won over those promiscuous popular masses, among which the religion of Jesus essentially gained its footing, with its doctrine of salvation and its universal sentimental basis. As an emanation from the ancient Iranian Mazdaism, Mithraism adopted the central theme of a battle between the powers of light and those of darkness and of evil. It too had a religious and exoteric form, but its core was constituted by its mysteries, that is, by initiation in the proper sense. This constituted its limitation, even if it had made it into a more complete traditional form. Subsequently, we witness, however, an ever more decisive historical separation between religion and initiation. We will consider the mysteries of Mithraism in the present note by seeking to indicate their nature according to the testimonies which have reached us, that is, those testimonies which are consistent on the one hand with the reports of the ancient writers, and on the other with the figurative monuments discovered in the physical centers of that cult and of those mysteries. Beyond the testimonies gathered by Franz Cumont in his classical work, we might consider the Mithraic ritual of the great magical papyrus of Paris, entitled Epothanathemos. Its text, translated and annotated, can be found in the 1st volume of our work, Introduction to Magic. And I will record that and post that one later. I have that book. Before all, for our present purposes, we must consider the myth of Mithras in its interior sense, as it can be seen through the various episodes as they are portrayed in a quality of sculptures and bas reliefs, some of magnificent workmanship. Indeed, we should remember that myths of this kind acted as dramatizations of the very experiences that the initiate must traverse, almost identifying himself with God by repeating his deeds. In the myth, Mithras is born from stone, and he is generated from stone, as a manifestation of the originating Uranian light. This birth occurs beside a river. It's a miraculous birth, witnessed only by several guardians hidden atop some hills. We can refer to these last invisible masters, not unrelated to those beings of the origins who, according to Hesiod, would never die, but as the wakeful watchers would continue to live through successive ages. The waters on the one side, the stone on the other, might allude to the duality constituted by the flux of becoming of the principle that rules it. Various interpretations of the stone are possible, as it is known. Various interpretations of the stone are possible, as it is known. It figures in myriad traditions. There is temptation, moreover, to establish an analogy between this genesis of Mithras and the theme of the Arthurian cycle, which features a sword that must be extracted from a stone floating on the water. And indeed, he rises from the stone. Mithras holds in one hand a sword, and in the other hand a torch, the first a symbol of strength, the other of light, of an illuminating power. In the stone, one can also see a symbol of an indestructibility and an interior steadfastness, qualities required of the initiate as the fundament of his rebirth. In fact, from the ancient reports, especially those transmitted to us by Nonus the grammarian, it appears that in the Mysteries of Mithras, the neophytes had to brave a number of trials, passing intrepidly across fire and water, enduring cold, hunger, and thirst. According to another report, the neophyte, to put his impassibility to the trial, was made to take part in the simulated killing of a man. And the story goes that Emperor Commodus, who wished to become an initiate, aroused the indignation of his milieu by taking that simulated killing seriously, thereby causing the death of a man. It may be that all this, that a qualification of the kind, could have relation to the symbol of the generating stone, that is, to one of the conditions of the initiatory rebirth. However, the qualities just mentioned appear to be required for the successive developments of the myth of Mithras, as Mithras must withstand a furious wind which immediately assails him, and which flagellates his naked body. But he goes directly towards a tree. He makes a garment of its leaves, and he feeds of its fruit. Given the initiatory meaning of the tree, here one might think of the tree whereupon Adam wished to put his hand to become similar to one of us, a god, but from which he is barred by Jehovah of the Old Testament. This meaning might be confirmed in a subsequent episode of the myth, which seems to relate to a confrontation between Mithras and the flaming sun Aeon. This episode concludes, however, with an alliance between the one and the other, such as to make Mithras the bearer of the sovereign force of that divinity. One treats the Havarno of the ancient Iranian Mazda tradition of glory conceived of as a supernatural fire, which is proper before all to the celestial divinities, but which descends also to illuminate the sovereigns, to consecrate them and vouch for them through victory. The sovereign upon whom this glory descended was built up beyond men, and was considered by his subjects as an immortal. And it is for that reason that in the assimilation of Mithras with Sol, ever newly victorious over the darkness, the same Mithras was esteemed as a protector and champion of the Roman Empire. But this dignity of Mithras also had another relation with the central episode of the myth, with the killing of the bull. Mithras spies the bull. So soon as the bull comes out of his cavern, Mithras leaps upon him, he rides him, gripping onto his horns. The quadruped takes up galloping, transporting Mithras on a furious race. Mithras does not cease his grip. He lets himself be transported without letting himself be bucked off until the animal, exhausted, re-enters his cavern from whence he issued. Then Mithras kills him with the sword. Here we see the confrontation with the elemental nether force of the life and of the transformation by the work of him who has recruited it upon its surface, considering the ride, and has also conquered it. In fact, the blood which gushes from the wound of the bull transforms itself into ears of wheat, falling on the earth. These produce vegetation. One only has to impede foul beasts from the rushing to drink of that blood. These are seen in the depictions of the myth, which has likewise an esoteric significance. When the hero or the initiate is not pure, that which in him remains of inferior nature will be strengthened thanks to the liberated energy, and will not only will the transformation not take place, but the result could be fatal. This is a danger which, using a different symbolism, has often been indicated in the text of alchemical hermeticism. According to the variant of the myth, the blood of the bull transforms into wine, possible allusion to the effect constituted by a kind of magical inebriation. This episode of the myth fulfills such an important role that it gives place to a specific rite of initiation of the Mysteries of Mithras, which consist of a baptism of blood. The Mithraea, or the places where such mysteries were celebrated, were so built as to include a higher and a lower part. They were almost always subterranean, which had its own significance. The neophyte who had overcome the preliminary trials was taken to the lower rooms. Naked, he received the blood of a bull, which was killed ritually by the Hierophant in the upper part of the sacrament. This blood was poured on him. Particular experiences brought about by this whole event were tied to the baptism of blood, which took the place of the Christian baptism. In general, the experiences of the Mithraic initiate can be referred in part to the above-mentioned ritual apothenostomos, even if other elements are to be found intermixed with the Mithraic ones. Other elements proper to Gnosticism and to magical traditions. Dietrich, who was the first to publish a translation of this evocative text in 1903, called it a liturgy. This designation is inexact, because it is not dealing with the ceremony with hymns and such, but rather of a ritual with instructions, magic formula, and invocations together with signs of the corresponding experiences. The ritual seems to presuppose a preliminary initiation, inasmuch as the subject in the first invocation declares that he has been purified by sacred ceremonies, and that he has been uplifted by the strong force of forces and by the incorruptible right, sufficiently to be able to aspire to the immortal birth, to subtract himself from the law of necessity which reigns in the lower world, and to contemplate the gods with Aeon, lords of the crowns of fire. There is talk of doors which open, of the 7 visions, first in their feminine aspect, then in the masculine aspect, as lords of the celestial pole. The theurgical action carries visibly beyond the 7, until amongst flashes and lightning a figure appears which is Sol Mithras himself. And the initiate must know how to fasten this god to himself, and then, with a command, to prohibit the god from departing from him, so as to transform himself into this god, to assume the god's nature, to such an extent as to die integrated in palagenesis, and in the integration to reach fulfillment. The ritual includes many other details upon which we cannot linger here. The reader is referred to the text which, as noted, has been reproduced, translated from Greek, with commentary in the first volume of our work, Introduction to Magic, which I will read. Here we will only add that Mithraism, too, is of the retrograde voyage across the 7 planetary spheres, no longer in the descent in which the soul is taken bit by bit into the spheres of the necessary, subjugated to gradual conditioning up to the state of mortal man, but rather in reascension, which goes beyond the spheres in a denuding, up to attainment of the principle of the unconditioned. The 7 is found also in the number of the grades in the Mithraic initiation in its institutionalized form, so to speak. The grades bore these names: Raven, Corax, Occult, Cryphes, Soldier, Miles, Lion, Leo, Persian, Perses, Messenger of the Sun, Heliodromus, and Father, Pater. Toward an interpretation of these grades, one might think of a preliminary mortification of the inferior nature, with which moreover a correspondence is stabilized to the alchemical hermetic symbolism of the raven, frequently alluded to the negredo phase, or to the black work, after which the initiate takes on an occult existence, 2nd grade. In the 3rd grade he becomes a soldier of the ranks of the Mithraic initiates, who, conforming to the warrior spirit of the tradition, were conceived of as a militia. The subsequent grade represents the strengthening of this quality, while the Persian grade plausibly established a connection with the original lineage of Mithraism, with that of the Iranian religion of the light. Regarding the Miles, Tertullian relates that during the act of conferring this grade, a sword and a crown were granted to the neophyte. The neophyte took the sword but rejected the crown, saying, "My crown is Mithras." As messenger of the sun, 6th grade, the initiate reflected the same quality attributed to Mithras in the myth, after his confrontation with Helios. Finally, Pater corresponded to the dignity of the initiator, initiatory paternity, and the lord of the Mithraic community. pater sacrorum, pater patrum. From the which it appears that, had Mithraism ever prevailed over Christianity while maintaining its central core, the consequences would have included also the maintenance of a regular initiatory tradition constituted by such a core in the subsequent history of the West, while for its exterior, religious side, the quality of the soter, the savior who gives health, which is sometimes attributed to Mithras, would have held sway. More, there was the aspect which made of the unconquered god, Invicta Mithra, the solar patron of the Roman Empire, for which one saw him the dispenser of the Mazda Halverno, which conferred victory, in a confluence with the ancient Roman tradition of Fortuna Regnia, the Latin translation of Tuque Basileos. This was expressed also in the object of the cult, that same Victoria, whose statue was erected in the Roman Senate. One sees from this, nevertheless, that Mithraism constituted a sacral, cultural, and initiatory complex, for which its very nature could not avoid being excised during that retrograde process which has carried the West away, distancing it ever more from the horizons of the glorious and luminous potency, until, at last, with the exception of an initiation, which was no longer an integral and central part of the system, but only a subterranean vein with the sporadic emergence, despite Christianity, every real contact with the supersensible was interrupted. I'll close that out. Subscribe. I'm going to be reading different Evola things, posting different conversations regarding studies on men and problems from the perspective of the right.